morning sun slowly rose over Istanbul, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The Bosphorus shimmered like a river of glass as ferries carried people from one side of the city to the other. Seagulls circled overhead, their calls mixing with the distant sound of the morning prayer echoing from ancient mosques. In the heart of the city, hidden among narrow streets filled with the scent of fresh Turkish coffee and warm simit bread, stood a tiny bookstore. It wasn't the kind of place tourists usually visited. The shelves were filled with centuries-old books, handwritten journals, and dusty maps that had survived generations. The owner of the shop was a young man named Emir. Emir was 26 years old. He wasn't rich, famous, or someone who enjoyed crowded places. Instead, he spent his days repairing damaged books and preserving old stories. He believed every book had a soul, and every torn page had once changed someone's life. His grandfather had opened the bookstore more than 50 years ago. Before passing away, he had told Emir something he never forgot. People don't just leave memories inside books. Sometimes they leave pieces of their hearts. Those words stayed with Emir every single day. Across Istanbul lived Elif, a 24-year-old travel photographer. Unlike other photographers who chased luxury hotels or famous tourist attractions, Elif searched for forgotten beauty. She loved empty streets after the rain, abandoned villages, old wooden houses, and places where history still whispered through broken walls. She believed every photograph should tell a story. Her dream was simple. One day, she wanted to publish a photography book called The Hidden Heart of Turkey. For months, she had been traveling across the country from the fairy chimneys of Cappadocia to the blue coast of Antalya, but now she had returned to Istanbul looking for inspiration. Her editor had suggested she visit old bookstores, because forgotten books often carried forgotten stories. She smiled at the idea. Maybe history was waiting for her there. That afternoon, heavy rain covered the city. People rushed through the streets carrying umbrellas while shopkeepers hurried to close their doors. Elif noticed the small bookstore with an old wooden sign hanging above the entrance. Without thinking, she stepped inside. A tiny brass bell rang softly as the door opened. The warm smell of old paper, leather bindings, and freshly brewed Turkish tea filled the room. For a moment, the noise of the city disappeared. It felt like stepping into another century. Behind the counter stood Emir, carefully restoring the cover of an ancient poetry book. He looked up. Their eyes met for only a second. "Welcome," he said with a gentle smile. "I'm looking for an old Ottoman poetry collection," Elif replied. Emir thought for a moment before walking toward one of the tallest shelves. After searching carefully, he pulled out a thick green book covered in faded gold patterns. "I think this is exactly what you're looking for." As he handed the book to Elif, something unexpected happened. A small, folded yellow letter slipped from between the pages and landed on the wooden floor. Both of them froze. The paper looked incredibly old. Its edges had turned brown with age. Neither of them touched it immediately. Finally, Elif bent down and carefully picked it up. There was no name, no address. Only one sentence written in elegant handwriting. "If you have found this letter, destiny has chosen you." A strange silence filled the bookstore. Outside, thunder echoed across the city. Inside, neither of them knew what to say. Emir whispered, "I've repaired hundreds of books, but I've never seen this letter before." Curiosity filled the room. Very carefully, they unfolded the fragile paper. Inside was the beginning of a heartbreaking love story. It was written by a young Turkish soldier named Kemal, who had fallen deeply in love with a girl named Aylin before leaving for war. The letter explained that he had promised to return and marry her. But as the words continued, the handwriting became weaker. The final paragraph simply said, "If this letter reaches anyone, please tell Aylin that I kept my promise in my heart until my very last breath." Neither Emir nor Elif spoke. The room suddenly felt much quieter than before. Elif gently closed the letter. "Do you think she ever found out?" she asked softly. Emir looked out through the rain-covered window. I don't know. He paused. But maybe. We're supposed to find out. For the first time since meeting each other, both of them smiled. They had entered the bookstore as complete strangers. But they walked out carrying the same mystery. Neither of them realized that this forgotten letter would take them on a journey across Turkey. A journey that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Istanbul woke beneath a blanket of soft gray clouds. The streets were still wet from the night's rain, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the narrow alleys of the old city. Emir arrived early at the bookstore. But instead of opening the shop as he did every morning, he carefully placed the old letter on his wooden desk. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was Kemal? Who was Aylin? And why had someone hidden such an important letter inside a poetry book for more than 70 years? Just then, the little brass bell above the shop door rang. It was Elif. She walked in carrying 2 cups of hot Turkish coffee. I thought we'd need these, she said with a smile. Emir laughed softly. I don't think we're going to solve a 70-year-old mystery without coffee. For the first time, the atmosphere between them felt comfortable. They were no longer strangers. They were partners in a journey neither of them had expected. The first thing they did was examine the letter more carefully. Elif gently spread it across the table, while Emir brought out a small magnifying glass that had belonged to his grandfather. The paper was old and fragile. Tiny cracks ran across its surface. Most of the ink had faded. But in the lower corner, hidden beneath a fold, Elif noticed something. Wait. She leaned closer. I think there's something written here. Emir carefully adjusted the light. Very faintly, they could read 3 words. Blue House, Skdar. They looked at each other. Skdar? Elif asked. It's one of the oldest districts in Istanbul, Emir replied. If the Blue House still exists, maybe someone there remembers them. Without wasting another minute, they closed the bookstore and headed toward the ferry terminal. The ferry slowly crossed the Bosphorus. Cold sea breeze filled the air as seagulls followed the boat, hoping for pieces of bread from passengers. Elif stood near the railing, holding her camera. She wasn't taking photographs. She was simply watching the city. It feels strange, she said quietly. We're searching for people we've never met. Emir nodded. Maybe every love story deserves someone who remembers it. Elif looked at him. There was kindness in his eyes, a quiet sincerity she hadn't noticed before. For a moment, she forgot about the letter. Instead, she wondered why talking to Emir felt so easy. When they reached Star, they spent hours walking through narrow stone streets lined with colorful wooden houses. Many of the old buildings had disappeared over the years. Some had been replaced with modern apartments. Others had collapsed long ago. They asked elderly shopkeepers, local bakers, tea sellers, even an old watch repairman. Most people simply shook their heads. No, we've never heard of Kemal. No Aylin either. As the afternoon sun began to set, disappointment slowly replaced their excitement. Maybe the trail had gone cold decades ago. Just as they were about to leave, they noticed an elderly woman watering flowers outside a small blue-painted house. Elif stopped walking. She looked at the faded walls, the old wooden balcony, the blue paint peeling from the windows. She whispered, Emir, the Blue House. Both of them hurried toward the woman. She looked nearly 90 years old. Her silver hair was neatly tied beneath a white scarf. Her eyes were gentle, but filled with memories. Excuse me, Emir said politely. We're looking for someone named Kemal. The old woman's hands suddenly froze. The watering can slipped slightly. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly asked, Why are you asking about him? Emir carefully removed the old letter from his bag. We found this hidden inside an old poetry book. The woman stared at it. Her hands began to tremble. Very slowly, she reached out and touched the paper. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. I never thought I'd see this letter again. Elif and Emir exchanged shocked glances. You know this letter? Elif asked softly. The old woman nodded. I do. She took a deep breath. My name is Fatma, and Aylin was my older sister. Silence surrounded them. Even the sounds of the busy street seemed to disappear. After 70 years, they had finally found someone connected to the mysterious letter. Fatma invited them inside. The little house looked frozen in time. Old black and white photographs covered the walls. A vintage clock ticked slowly in the corner. On a wooden shelf sat a dusty music box that hadn't been opened in years. Fatma carefully placed the letter on the table. She looked at it as if she were seeing a lost family member. I remember the day Kemal left, she whispered. Aylin stood at this very window, waiting for him until the train disappeared. Fatma's voice cracked. Every single evening after that, my sister came back to this window. She believed Kemal would return. For weeks, then months, and finally, years, Elif felt tears forming in her eyes. Did Aylin ever marry someone else? Fatma slowly shook her head. Never, she said her heart had already chosen. The room became completely silent. Emir looked at the old photographs hanging on the wall. One picture showed a smiling young soldier standing beside a beautiful girl in a white dress. On the back of the photograph were 4 handwritten words. Until the stars return. Emir turned the picture over once more. Something was tucked behind it. A tiny folded map. With one location circled in red. Cappadocia. The mystery wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The next morning, neither Emir nor Elif could stop thinking about the old map. A single red circle. One place. Cappadocia. It was almost 600 kilometers away from Istanbul, a land famous for its fairy chimneys, underground cities, and colorful hot air balloons. But why had Kemal marked that place? What secret was waiting there? Before leaving, they visited Fatma once more. The elderly woman was already awake, sitting in her small garden with a cup of Turkish tea. When she saw them, she smiled warmly. I knew you'd come. Emir placed the old map on the table. Do you know why Kemal marked Cappadocia? Fatma looked at the map for a long moment. Her eyes slowly filled with memories. When they were young, she began. Kemal and Aylin dreamed of visiting Cappadocia after their wedding. They wanted to watch the sun rise together while hundreds of hot air balloons floated across the sky. It was their biggest dream. But the war began before they could go. She paused, taking a deep breath. Perhaps Kemal left something there. Those words were enough. Emir and Elif booked the first flight they could find. By evening, they arrived in Cappadocia. The air felt different. Cooler, cleaner, the strange rock formations stretched across the valleys like giant sculptures created by nature itself. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, hundreds of small lights began glowing from cave hotels carved into the rocks. Elif couldn't stop taking photographs. Every corner looked magical. This place doesn't even feel real, she whispered. Emir smiled. Maybe that's why Kemal chose it. The next morning, they woke before sunrise. The sky was still dark when they climbed a nearby hill. Within minutes, the horizon slowly turned pink. Then orange. Then gold. One by one, hot air balloons began rising into the sky. Soon there were dozens, then hundreds. They floated silently above the valleys like colorful lanterns. Elif stood speechless. It looks like a dream. Emir looked at her instead of the balloons. The view is beautiful, but I think you're smiling even brighter. Elif turned toward him, slightly embarrassed. You always know what to say. I usually don't, Emir admitted. It's just, with you, the words come naturally. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. There was something changing between them. Something gentle. Something they hadn't expected. But before either of them could say another word, Elif remembered why they had come. The map. She unfolded it again. The red circle pointed toward an old, abandoned stone church hidden deep inside one of Cappadocia's valleys. After asking several locals for directions, they finally reached the place. The church was centuries old. Its walls were cracked. Wild flowers had grown between the ancient stones. Almost no tourists came there anymore. Inside, faded paintings still covered parts of the ceiling. The silence felt almost sacred. Emir looked around carefully. There has to be something here. For nearly an hour they searched every corner. Nothing, no letters, no boxes, no clues. Disappointed, they sat outside beneath an old almond tree. As Elif leaned against the trunk, she noticed something carved into the bark. 2 initials. K, a Kemal. Aylin, her heart began racing. Emir. He hurried over. Hidden beneath the initials was a small symbol shaped like an arrow pointing toward a large flat stone nearby. Together, they pushed the heavy stone aside. It barely moved. But underneath, they discovered a small rusted metal box wrapped in worn leather. Neither of them spoke. Emir carefully lifted it out. The lock had almost completely rusted away. With gentle pressure, it opened. Inside were several treasures: a silver ring, a dried white flower, a black and white photograph of Kemal and Aylin laughing together, and one final sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Kemal's handwriting, were the words, "To my future wife, Aylin." Elif's hands trembled. This is the letter he never got to give her. Emir nodded silently. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten message. My dearest Aylin, if you're reading this, then fate has been kinder to us than I ever imagined. I buried this box here because this is where I wanted to ask you to marry me. If I return from the war, we'll come here together, and I'll place this ring on your finger while the balloons rise into the morning sky. If I don't return, please don't spend your life waiting for me. Live, smile, find happiness, even if it's without me. Because loving you has already been the greatest gift of my life. Forever yours, Kemal. By the time Emir finished reading, both he and Elif had tears in their eyes. Neither of them noticed that the wind had gently carried a few flower petals across the valley. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with love that had waited 70 years to be heard. Elif wiped away a tear. We have to take this back to Fatma. Emir nodded. She deserves to know the truth. As they carefully packed the box, neither of them realized something else had quietly changed. While searching for Kemal and Aylin's unfinished love story, their own hearts had begun writing a new one. And back in Istanbul, someone was already searching for them. The journey back to Istanbul felt different. When Emir and Elif boarded the early morning flight from Cappadocia, neither of them spoke much. The old metal box rested safely inside Emir's backpack. Every few minutes, Elif would glance at it, still unable to believe they had actually found Kemal's final gift. Outside the airplane window, the clouds stretched endlessly beneath them. It felt as if they were carrying not just an old letter, but 70 years of unanswered questions. Meanwhile, back in Istanbul, someone else had been waiting. Inside a luxurious office overlooking the Bosphorus sat Murat Demir, a successful businessman in his early 30s. Expensive paintings covered the walls. His desk was spotless. His tailored suit and polished shoes reflected the image of a man who always got what he wanted. But today, he looked unusually restless. On his desk lay several magazines featuring Elif's photography. For almost a year, Murat had tried to convince Elif to work exclusively for his media company. He admired her talent. But over time, his admiration had quietly turned into obsession. Elif had politely refused every offer. She wanted freedom, not fame. That answer was something Murat had never accepted. A young assistant entered the office. Sir, we've found her. Murat looked up immediately. Where? She left Istanbul 3 days ago. She flew to Cappadocia. Murat frowned. Alone? No, the assistant hesitated. She was traveling with a man. Silence filled the room. Murat slowly stood up. Who is he? We're still investigating. The assistant handed him a photograph taken outside the airport. Murat stared at it. It showed Emir carrying the old backpack while Elif walked beside him, laughing about something. For a moment, jealousy flashed across Murat's face. "So," he whispered, "there's someone else." That same afternoon, Emir and Elif arrived back in Istanbul. Their first stop wasn't the bookstore, it was Fatma's blue house. The elderly woman opened the door before they could even knock. "I knew you'd return today." Emir smiled warmly. "We found something." They carefully placed the rusted metal box on the table. Fatma stared at it in disbelief. Her trembling fingers slowly touched the faded leather. "I've seen this before," she whispered. "Kemal carried this box everywhere." Tears rolled down her cheeks before she had even opened it. When Fatma saw the silver ring, she covered her mouth. "Oh, Kemal," her voice broke. "He really bought it." She turned toward an old wooden cabinet. From the top drawer, she carefully removed a faded photograph. It showed Aylin wearing a simple blue dress. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "I wonder what kind of ring you'll choose." Fatma smiled through her tears. She never knew he had already chosen one. Then Emir handed her Kemal's final letter. Fatma adjusted her glasses and began reading. With every line, her breathing became slower. By the time she reached the final sentence, she couldn't continue. She quietly handed the letter back to Emir. He loved her enough to set her free. The room fell silent. No one spoke. Even the ticking clock seemed louder than before. That evening, Fatma led them into a room they hadn't noticed earlier. It had remained locked for decades. She slowly opened the old wooden door. Dust floated through the air as sunlight entered through a small window. Everything inside had been preserved exactly as Aylin had left it. Her books, her sewing machine, a dried bouquet of flowers, a small vanity mirror, even a white wedding dress, still hanging beside the window. Elif's eyes filled with tears. She kept it all. Fatma nodded. She believed Kemal would return one day. Emir gently touched the edge of the wedding dress. It was covered in dust. Yet somehow, it still looked beautiful, almost as if hope itself had protected it. While exploring the room, Elif noticed a leather-bound diary resting inside a wooden chest. "Fatma, May?" The elderly woman smiled sadly. "I think Aylin would want someone to read it now." Elif carefully opened the diary. The pages were yellow with age. The first entry spoke of ordinary days, family dinners, spring festivals, dreams of the future. But as the pages continued, the writing became more emotional. Every entry mentioned Kemal. Every page spoke of waiting. One passage read, "Today marks 1 year since Kemal left. Everyone tells me to move on. But how can I? Every sunset reminds me of his smile. Every ferry crossing reminds me of our last goodbye. If love is real, then waiting is simply another way of loving." Elif could no longer hold back her tears. She quietly closed the diary. I've never read anything so beautiful. As night fell, Emir and Elif walked along the Bosphorus waterfront. The city lights reflected across the water like thousands of tiny stars. For several minutes, they walked in silence. Finally, Emir spoke. "Do you ever wonder, what if we had never found that bookstore?" Elif smiled softly. "Then we'd probably still be strangers." Emir looked at her. "And I think that would have been the greatest mystery of all." Elif laughed quietly. For the first time, she didn't look away. Their eyes met. The distance between them slowly disappeared. Emir gently reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally. No promises, no dramatic words, just two hearts quietly admitting what they had both begun to feel. But neither of them noticed. Across the street, a black luxury car was parked beneath the shadows. Inside, Murat watched them through the window. His expression was cold. His jaw tightened as he saw Emir holding Elif's hand. He whispered to himself, If I can't have her, then neither will you. The engine started. The car slowly disappeared into the night. Far away, the Bosphorus shimmered peacefully, completely unaware that love was no longer the only thing following Emir and Elif. The following morning, Istanbul was covered in a soft blanket of mist. The Bosphorus looked calm, but Emir couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had followed him since the previous night. He stood outside his bookstore, unlocking the old wooden door when he noticed something strange. The lock had scratches on it. Fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open. He quickly stepped inside. The shelves were untouched. The cash drawer was still closed. Nothing seemed to be missing. But on the counter, there was a single black envelope. No stamp, no address. Only one sentence written in bold handwriting. Some stories should stay buried. Emir's heart began to race. He looked outside, but the street was already crowded with morning shoppers. Whoever had left the message was long gone. At the same time, Elif was at Fatma's house. She couldn't stop thinking about Aylin's diary. There were still many unread pages. Fatma quietly placed the diary in front of her. "I've never had the courage to finish reading it," she admitted. "I always hoped my sister would come back and read it herself." Elif gently opened the diary again. The pages revealed years of waiting. Every month, Aylin wrote about Kemal. Every birthday, every holiday, every sunset she watched from the same window. She never stopped believing he might return. Then, near the end of the diary, Elif discovered a page that had been folded twice. It looked different from the others. As she carefully unfolded it, a small piece of pressed lavender fell onto her lap. The page read, "If anyone ever finds this diary, please don't remember me as the woman who waited. Remember me as the woman who loved without regret." Because real love is never measured by how long two people stay together. It is measured by how deeply they change each other's hearts. And Kemal changed mine forever. Elif wiped away a tear. "I wish she had known about his final letter," she whispered. Fatma smiled sadly. "Perhaps now she does." Later that afternoon, Emir arrived carrying the black envelope. He showed it to Fatma and Elif. Neither of them recognized the handwriting. Fatma's smile disappeared. "Someone doesn't want the truth to come out." "But why?" Elif asked. What could anyone possibly gain from hiding a 70-year-old love story? Before anyone could answer, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was a middle-aged man in a dark suit. He introduced himself politely. "My name is Ahmed Kaya. I work for the National Historical Archive. I've been searching for Kemal's missing letters for almost 20 years. Emir and Elif exchanged surprised glances. "How did you find us?" Emir asked. Ahmed smiled. When word spread that an old letter had been discovered in the Grand Bazaar, historians became very interested. He paused before adding, "But I'm afraid you're not the only ones looking." Ahmed explained that Kemal had written several letters, not just one. Most had disappeared after the war. Rumors suggested that someone had intentionally hidden them. "Why would anyone do that?" Elif asked. Ahmed hesitated. "Because Kemal came from one of Istanbul's wealthiest families." Everyone fell silent. He was expected to marry the daughter of another powerful family. But he fell in love with Aylin instead. Fatma slowly nodded. "I remember, many people opposed their relationship." Ahmed continued, "Some influential people believed their love would bring shame to the family. So after Kemal disappeared in the war, every trace of their relationship was quietly erased." Emir clenched his fists. They tried to erase their love from history. Ahmed nodded. But history has a way of finding its voice. As evening approached, Ahmed carefully examined the silver ring from the metal box. Inside the band, he noticed tiny engraved letters. He held it under a magnifying glass. "There is an inscription." Emir leaned closer. "What does it say?" Ahmed smiled. "It's not just an inscription. It's a location." The engraving read, "Galata Tower, midnight, 14 October. Everyone stared at each other. "Tomorrow is the 14th, Elif whispered. The room suddenly became very quiet. Was it another clue? Or was someone waiting for them? That night, Emir walked Elif home through the quiet streets of Istanbul. The city lights reflected beautifully on the Bosphorus. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Elif smiled. "Do you ever think this journey found us for a reason?" Emir looked at her. "I used to believe I repaired old books." He gently took her hand. "But now I think they've been repairing me." Elif's eyes sparkled. Without saying a word, she rested her head lightly against his shoulder as they continued walking. Neither of them noticed the figure standing on a nearby rooftop, watching every step they took. The mysterious observer slowly lowered a camera. A photograph of Emir and Elif slipped into a folder already filled with dozens of pictures. The person whispered into a phone, "They're going to Galata Tower tomorrow." A cold voice answered from the other end, "Good this time, don't let them leave with the truth." The call ended. Far below, the streets of Istanbul remained peaceful. But for Emir and Elif, the most dangerous chapter of their journey was about to begin. The next day felt unusually long. Every hour seemed slower than the last. Neither Emir nor Elif could stop thinking about the inscription inside the silver ring. Galata Tower, midnight, 14 October. Was it another message from Kemal? Or was it a trap? That afternoon, Ahmet visited the bookstore again, carrying several old military records. He carefully spread the documents across Emir's wooden desk. "I found something interesting," he said. According to the records, Kemal had returned to Istanbul once after the war, but only for one night. His name appeared in an army transit register dated 14 October 1954, the very same date engraved inside the ring. Emir looked confused. "But Fatma said he never came home." Ahmet nodded. "That's true. He never reached Aylin. So, where did he go?" No one had an answer. As the evening approached, dark clouds covered Istanbul. A cold wind swept through the streets. By 10 o'clock, Emir, Elif, and Ahmet made their way toward the famous Galata Tower. The historic tower stood proudly above the city, illuminated by soft, golden lights. Tourists had already left. Only a few people remained in the nearby cafes. The streets grew quieter with every passing minute. Elif looked up at the ancient tower. "It feels like history is waiting for us." Emir smiled gently. "Maybe it is." At exactly 11:55 p.m., they climbed the narrow spiral staircase inside the tower. Every step echoed through the old stone walls. When they reached the top, the city stretched out beneath them. The Bosphorus sparkled under the moonlight. Bridges glowed in the distance. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, too peaceful. The clock slowly ticked toward midnight. 11:58, 11:59, then 12 o'clock. Nothing happened. Elif looked around. Maybe we're too late. Just then, a strong gust of wind blew across the observation deck. Something fluttered beneath an old wooden bench near the wall. A folded piece of paper. Emir picked it up carefully. It wasn't old. It looked almost new. Inside, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "If you've reached this place, you've proven that love is stronger than time. Now go to the place where the sea kisses the stones. Only there will the truth finally be complete." No signature, no explanation, only a tiny drawing of an old lighthouse. Ahmet frowned. This wasn't written 70 years ago. The paper is modern. Elif looked confused. Then who left it? Before anyone could answer, a loud noise echoed behind them. Bang! The heavy wooden door leading to the staircase slammed shut. Emir ran toward it. Locked, he pulled the handle harder. It wouldn't move. Someone had locked them inside. Elif's heartbeat quickened. "We're trapped." Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the darkness. Slow, calm, deliberate, a tall man stepped into the moonlight. It was Murat. He was dressed in a long black coat, his expression cold and unreadable. Elif stared at him in disbelief. Murat, what are you doing here? He smiled faintly. I could ask you the same question. Emir stepped in front of Elif. What do you want? Murat looked directly at Emir. I want you to stop digging into the past. Ahmet recognized him immediately. Murat demurred, so your family really was involved. Murat's smile disappeared. My grandfather was one of the men who tried to bury this story. He slowly walked closer. He believed Kemal's relationship with Aylin would disgrace our family's reputation. So the letters disappeared. The photographs disappeared. The truth disappeared. Elif's voice trembled. You've known this all along? I discovered it after my grandfather died, Murat admitted. I found his journals. He spent decades making sure no one would ever learn about Kemal and Aylin. Emir couldn't believe what he was hearing. So you've been following us because you wanted to protect a lie? Murat shook his head. No, I wanted to protect my family. For several seconds, silence filled the tower. Then Murat reached into his coat. Emir immediately tensed. But instead of pulling out a weapon, Murat removed a small leather notebook. My grandfather kept this hidden until his death. He handed it to Emir. I've carried this guilt for years. Emir slowly opened it. Inside were detailed notes describing how Kemal had survived the war and secretly returned to Istanbul. But before he could meet Aylin, he had been involved in a carriage accident near the waterfront. Seriously injured, Kemal entrusted his engagement ring and final letters to a close friend, asking him to hide them until they could safely reach Aylin. The friend tried, but powerful families stopped him. The letters vanished. The ring disappeared. And Aylin spent the rest of her life believing Kemal had forgotten her. Tears filled Murat's eyes. My grandfather regretted what he did until his last breath. He told me, if anyone ever uncovers the truth, don't stop them. Elif looked at him in shock. Then why did you threaten us? Murat lowered his head. Because I was afraid. Afraid my family's name would be remembered for cruelty instead of kindness. Emir closed the notebook. The truth doesn't erase the past, but hiding it only creates more pain. Murat nodded silently. You're right. Just then, Ahmet noticed something tucked into the notebook's back cover. A faded photograph. On its reverse side was another handwritten clue. Maiden's Lighthouse, sunrise, below it were 3 simple words. Our final goodbye. Ahmet looked at the others. The lighthouse, the note we found, mentioned it too. Emir smiled softly. This is the last place. Elif took a deep breath. Tomorrow, we finally finish Kemal and Aylin's story. As the 4 of them descended the tower together, none of them noticed an elderly man standing across the street. He watched them quietly, holding an old walking stick. As they disappeared into the night, he whispered to himself with a gentle smile, at last, someone kept their promise. The first light of dawn slowly spread across Istanbul. The city was unusually quiet. Fishing boats drifted gently across the Bosphorus, and the cool morning breeze carried the scent of salt water through the empty streets. Emir barely slept that night. Neither had Elif. Both of them knew they were only one clue away from uncovering the complete truth about Kemal and Aylin. But deep inside, they also knew this journey had changed them forever. At 5 a.m, Emir, Elif, Fatma, Ahmet, and even Murat gathered at the ferry terminal. No one spoke much. Each person carried their own emotions. Fatma held Kemal's ring carefully inside a small velvet pouch. She looked at it every few minutes, as though she still couldn't believe it was real. The ferry slowly left the dock. The sun had not yet risen. The water reflected the soft blue color of the sky. As they approached the Maiden's Tower, the famous lighthouse standing alone in the Bosphorus, everyone felt an unusual sense of peace. It was almost as if history itself had been waiting for this morning. When they stepped onto the small island, an elderly caretaker greeted them. He looked to be in his late 80s. His face was wrinkled with age, but his eyes were bright and kind. Good morning, he said with a gentle smile. I've been expecting you. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Ahmet asked, expecting us? The old man nodded. My name is Hassan. I've been taking care of this lighthouse for more than 50 years. Then his eyes fell on the silver ring in Fatma's hand. His expression suddenly changed. He whispered, "So, you finally found it." Fatma gasped. "You've seen this ring before?" Hassan slowly nodded. "I was only a young boy, but I remember everything." Everyone gathered inside the old lighthouse. The walls were covered with photographs of ships, storms, and Istanbul from decades ago. Hassan carefully opened an old wooden cabinet. From the very back, he removed a faded metal tin. Its surface was rusty. The lock had long since broken. He placed it gently on the table. "I've kept this safe for 70 years. Emir looked stunned. "What is it?" Hassan smiled sadly. "The last thing Kemal ever gave me." Silence filled the room. Very slowly, Hassan opened the tin. Inside were several old items: a military badge, a pocket watch, a small dried red rose, and one final sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this envelope had never been opened. Across the front, written in Kemal's handwriting, were the words, "To whoever keeps loving after me." Emir carefully broke the old seal. The paper inside was yellow with age, but perfectly preserved. He began reading aloud. "If you are reading this letter, then time has finally completed what I could not. I waited here on the morning of October 14. I carried the ring in my pocket and hope in my heart. But fate had already chosen another path. If Aylin never receives this letter, tell her I never broke my promise. I came back. I searched for her. I loved her until my final breath. And if another couple finds these words many years from now, don't waste the time that we lost. Life is shorter than fear. Tell the truth. Forgive quickly. Love completely, because tomorrow is a promise that no one owns." By the time Emir reached the final sentence, no one in the room could hold back their tears. Even Murat quietly wiped his eyes. Fatma held the letter close to her heart. For 70 years, her sister had believed she had been forgotten. Now she finally knew the truth. Kemal had never abandoned her. He had kept every promise he could. Hassan looked toward the lighthouse window. "I remember that morning," he whispered. Kemal arrived before sunrise. He looked injured. But he kept smiling. He asked me to give the ring and this letter to Aylin if anything happened. I promised I would. The old man's voice broke. But before I could leave, my father became seriously ill. We left Istanbul the very next day. When I returned months later, Aylin had already moved away. I searched for years. But I never found her. I've carried this guilt all my life. Fatma gently placed her hand on Hassan's shoulder. You kept it safe. And today, you fulfilled your promise. The old caretaker closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, the weight on his heart finally disappeared. As the morning sun rose higher, everyone walked outside. The golden light reflected beautifully across the Bosphorus. The city looked peaceful. Emir stood beside Elif near the edge of the lighthouse. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Elif broke the silence. "Do you think destiny is real?" Emir smiled. "I don't know. But I know one thing. If I hadn't found that letter, I would never have found you." Elif looked into his eyes. Her heart raced. She had spent years traveling the world alone. She had never planned to fall in love. Yet somehow, love had quietly found her. She smiled through her tears. "I think Kemal's last letter wasn't only for Aylin." Emir nodded. "I think it was for us too." Slowly, he reached into his pocket. Not with Kemal's ring. That belonged to history. Instead, he pulled out a tiny silver pendant shaped like a book. "I bought this yesterday." Elif looked surprised. "You did?" Emir laughed nervously. "I wasn't planning to give it to you today. But after everything we've learned, I don't want to wait." He gently placed the pendant in her hand. "I don't know what our future looks like. But I'd like to write it with you." Tears rolled down Elif's cheeks. She smiled. Then, without saying a single word, She wrapped her arms around him. The waves gently crashed against the rocks below. The seagulls flew overhead. And for the first time since this journey had begun, love was no longer a story from the past. It had become their present. The morning after their visit to the lighthouse felt different. For the first time since they had discovered the mysterious letter inside the old poetry book, there were no more clues to follow. No more hidden maps. No more forgotten messages. Kemal and Aylin's story had finally reached its ending. But for Emir and Elif, a brand new chapter was just beginning. A week later, the story of the lost lovers quietly spread across Istanbul. Not through gossip, not through social media, but through newspapers, museums, and historians. Ahmet carefully verified every document they had found: the letters, the diary, the photographs, the silver ring. Every piece of evidence proved one thing: Kemal had never abandoned Aylin. History had simply hidden the truth. Soon, museums requested permission to preserve the letters so future generations could learn about the love that survived even time itself. Fatma agreed. But on one condition, she said. The letters must never be locked away where no one can read them. They belong to everyone who still believes in true love. Months passed. Spring arrived in Istanbul. Cherry blossoms filled the parks. The Bosphorus sparkled beneath clear blue skies. One afternoon, Emir received an unexpected package at the bookstore. There was no return address. Inside was an old black-and-white photograph. It showed Kemal and Aylin standing beneath an almond tree in Cappadocia. On the back, someone had written, "Some love stories never end. They simply find new hearts." Emir smiled. He carefully framed the photograph and placed it above the bookstore entrance. From that day onward, every customer who entered asked about it. And every customer left knowing the story of Kemal and Aylin. Their love would never be forgotten again. Meanwhile, Elif finally completed the photography book she had dreamed about for years. She named it The Hidden Heart of Turkey. But instead of filling it with only landscapes, she included the entire journey of Kemal and Aylin. The old bookstore, the blue house, the diary, the Cappadocia Valley, the lighthouse, and one final photograph, a picture of the sunrise over the Bosphorus. The last page contained a single sentence. Some places become beautiful because of history. Others become unforgettable because someone loved there. The book became a bestseller across Turkey. Readers from around the world wrote letters saying the story had made them call their parents, forgive old friends, and tell loved ones how much they mattered. Elif realized something incredible. A love story that had once been hidden inside an old book was now touching thousands of lives. One warm summer evening, Emir invited Elif back to Cappadocia. She smiled as soon as she saw the plane tickets. "You really like surprising me, don't you?" Emir laughed. "Only when the surprise is worth it." The next morning, they stood once again on the same hill where hundreds of colorful hot air balloons floated across the sunrise. The sky looked exactly as it had months before. Only this time, they weren't searching for someone else's dream. They were living their own. Emir took a deep breath. "I've spent my whole life repairing broken books." He looked into Elif's eyes. "But you repaired something much more important. My heart." Elif felt tears forming. Before she could say anything, Emir slowly knelt on one knee. This time, he wasn't holding Kemal's ring. That ring rested safely inside the Istanbul Museum, where everyone could see it. Instead, he held a simple silver ring he had chosen himself. "Elif, you walked into my bookstore looking for an old poetry book. I found something much more valuable. I found you. Will you marry me?" For a few seconds, the world became completely silent. The balloons drifted peacefully through the sky. The wind gently moved Elif's hair. She smiled through happy tears. Then, she whispered the one word Emir had been hoping to hear. "Yes." Emir slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd nearby noticed what had happened and began applauding. Strangers smiled. Children cheered. A balloon pilot sounded the burner, and the flame roared into the morning sky. It felt as if the entire valley was celebrating with them. A year later, their wedding took place in a beautiful garden overlooking the Bosphorus. Family and friends gathered beneath strings of glowing lights. Fatma attended as the guest of honor. She carried a small bouquet of white roses, the same flowers Aylin had loved. Before the ceremony began, she quietly looked toward the evening sky and whispered, "Aylin, he kept his promise. And now, they're keeping theirs." After the wedding, Emir and Elif returned to the old bookstore together. Above the entrance, they placed a new wooden sign. It read, "Every book holds a story. Some stories find the right reader." People from around the world visited the shop. Some came to buy books, some came to hear the legend, and some simply came to believe that true love still existed. The end as the sun set over the Bosphorus, Emir locked the bookstore for the evening. Elif slipped her hand into his. Together, they walked toward the waterfront, where everything had begun. Above them, the moon reflected across the water. Below them, the city glowed with life. Somewhere in the gentle breeze, it almost felt as if two familiar voices whispered together. Kemal, Aylin, their story had finally found peace. And beneath the Bosphorus moon, love had found its way home.